Hello, it is 1:30 p.m. in New York, 7:30 p.m. in Johannesburg, and 12:30 a.m. in Bangkok. Welcome to In Transit with Sundae Bean. I'm an intercultural strategist, a transformation facilitator, and a solution-oriented coach. And I'm on a mission to help you adapt and succeed through any life transition. If you know my work, you know that I say that our lives are always in transit, and in so many ways. But there is one way that we all have in common, and that is aging. And this week's guest said so perfectly, we are aging from the moment we are born. It's not something annoying that olders do. So this is from Ashton Applewhite, and she is our guest today on In Transit. Welcome, Ashton.
My pleasure, Sunday. Thanks for having me.
So I'll say a little bit more about those who are unfamiliar with Ashton's work. Ashton Applewhite is the author of This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Ageism, and she is the co-founder of Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. She's an internationally recognized expert on ageism. She speaks widely at venues that have included TED Talks, the United Nations, and she's also appeared in We Can Do Hard Things with Glennon Doyle, has written for Harper's, The Guardian, The New York Times, and more, and is the voice of Yo, Is This Ageist? Ashton, needless to say, is a leading spokesperson for the emerging movement to raise awareness of ageism and to dismantle it. So, Ashton, I think it's obvious from our quick pre-chat that I've been really looking forward to learning from you and hearing your perspectives today. But I want to make a little confession when we start. I have this thing, when I would listen to your work about ageism and the ways in which it limits us, I keep thinking about a wedding dance where I am 86 and like Salt and Pepper come on, like something from the 90s, right? And my spirit will want to get out there and pull out, the Roger Rabbit or all the 90s moves. But I am afraid that I am going to be this person who says no because of fear that people will think I'm out of my mind, that I'm crazy, or they'll think it's cute or make fun of me. And I realize that's because I'm afraid of ageism. Right? So
it's because you live in an ageist society. These are fears we all have. I mean, I will say in the context of dancing, I happen to not be a good dancer, but to love it. And if you are having fun to the music, the people see that. And I think they will respond to it, especially at a wedding. But the fears that you talk about are very real and very universally shared, and there should be absolutely no shame. What you've done is the most important, task already, which is twofold: to look at your own attitudes and think about how you feel about age and aging, because we have to do that interior work, as I'm sure you know, before we can take any kind of change out into the world. But once we do that, looking in ourselves, immediately we start to see it in the culture around us. It's liberating. You understand that this is because of ageism, not because you are a bad dancer or a bad person or your friends are all jerks, right? There are enormous social and economic forces, sadly, that want us to be divided and afraid and out of sight for a bunch of, reasons that differ for each of us, primarily because fear is commodified. It divides us and it persuades us to buy things we don't need and, behaviors that aren't good for us. But I will say, for adults, there is no such thing as age appropriate. And I hope you play plenty of Salt and Pepper at that party.
It's like, don't spoil my joy. The last thing I want to do, if I'm able to move, I don't want my joy to be spoiled.
You are joyful, people will see that. And there are always going to be a few people, snickering, but they're not the majority. Most people won't care. And some people, I think about this because I do go to clubs where my partner and I are the oldest people by far, and I hate being conspicuous because of my age. But it's too fun not to stay home. And I know that for the few people who are, going, what are those old people doing there? I know there are many more people going, hey, look at those older people. Maybe I can do that when I'm their age. And most people just don't care.
Right. That's true.
But it does take
So,
courage. I want to
yeah,
acknowledge that too.
absolutely. And bucking convention. So this is just a playful way to start talking about it, but this is actually really serious. You talk about how ageism casts a shadow over our entire lives. Can you say more about the scope of that?
Sure. Yeah, I have fresh fodder in that I got a text this morning from, let's see, she's my partner's ex-wife's daughter, but we have a family Zoom. It's been one of the bonuses of the pandemic, one of the few.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a terrific, very serious kid. She wants to be an educator. She's a high school junior. And she said, is what I experience, which is people telling me I'm cute, or that I'm too young to know about a thing, or being generally condescending and dismissive when I am talking about something that I know about. And is that ageism? And my answer is yes, 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 it is. Ageism is any judgment on the basis of age. Anytime we make an assessment of what we think someone is capable of because of how old we think they are. Sometimes it's called reverse ageism when it's directed against young people, but it's just ageism. We don't need that extra label. And that is why it casts a shadow across our entire lives. Although we live in a youth-obsessed culture in the West where youth is commodified. So I will say that older people bear the brunt of it.
Yep, absolutely. And that was one of the findings I shared briefly about my Wisdom Fusion project. One of the findings that I discovered was how we do think, wisdom is held by the eldest among us. And you have said in other, yes, I think you say in one of your podcasts that you've met a lot of old people that haven't learned anything. Right?
I mean, a stereotype can be benevolent and still be a stereotype.
Yep, absolutely.
It lumps people together in a group. And I think that we definitely acquire experience with age. And if we learn from that experience, as most of us do, it can turn into wisdom. I think if we could agree on what wisdom looks like, and you drew a Venn diagram of all the people who are wise, there would be more older people in it than younger people because we've got more, experiences under our belt. But to say that all older people are wise is no better than saying all older people are incompetent or or conservative, because it's a generalization, it's a stereotype, especially in view of the fact that the longer we live, the more different from one another we become. You're nerdy, so I'll put it the nerdy way. The defining characteristic of old age is heterogeneity. So all stereotypes are wrong and misguided, but especially to lump all people over any age into a given bucket.
Yeah. And what I find fascinating is all of this media about Gen X and Gen Z. And there's like so much confidence in these articles about what this generation is doing. It assumes there's homogeneity within the generation set, right? Which is not true. And then we think we know something about the older group, which is the furthest away. I find that fascinating.
I'm on a complete tear to get people to try literally to use the word generationless. I am a different generation from my child and from my parent. That is a real meaning of generation, but there is no scientific consensus on what the term means, and there is no evidence whatsoever. How could anything be true of everyone in the world born in roughly the same time? But marketers love these labels. Politicians love these labels. Demographers love these labels, and they are convenient. They make us feel like we belong to something, but we overuse them, and they are really problematic because the minute you hear Gen blank, we're all biased. We make all sorts of associations with that given name of a group of people born around the same time, and that closes our mind. It fixes stereotypes in place, and it makes it much easier to pit generations against each other. The workplace, it's so common. Those classic one is this now out of date. It's now going to be Gen Z. But those millennials, they're so disloyal. They change jobs all the time. Guess what? I was born in 1952. When I was in my 20s and early 30s, I switched jobs all the time
Mm-hmm.
too. It's a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
function of how old we are, not when we were born. So generational labels really do a lot to divide people on the basis of age. And most importantly, they cover up the much more important role that class in particular, and also gender and ethnicity play in shaping our experience. We
Mm-hmm.
live in such an age segregated society. So
Mm-hmm.
few of us have friends and mix it up with people of all ages
Right.
that it's really easy to think, oh, I like or don't like, I like that person because they're my age, or we like the same things because they're
Mm-hmm.
my age. And that
Mm-hmm.
person is a jerk because they're older. Age is very seldom the actual reason for people to get along or not get along.
So why are we so fixed on it?
Well, it's super convenient. It's
Mm-hmm.
really handy. It's
Mm-hmm.
just and it's a habit.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Mm-hmm.
one way to think about breaking it is instead of referring to, the boomers, the millennials, the whatever, just say older people or younger
Mm-hmm.
people.
Yep. Yep.
Because then you don't get into this. It is a problematic to label people, to lump people into age groups anyway. And
Mm-hmm.
the older the group, the less accurate the label can be because of
Mm-hmm.
heterogeneity
Mm-hmm.
increasing with age, right? So if you
Mm-hmm.
just say, if you refer to older people in the office or in the
Mm-hmm.
band or in whatever, that gets
Mm-hmm.
you over it's accurate. It's much
Yep.
more accurate
Right.
than attaching a generational label, which is never scientifically accurate. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a way to do that without having the associations that we all have to
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
generational label click into place, and
Mm-hmm.
refer to an age group. Say
Mm-hmm.
age diverse, say
Yep.
mixed age, lose the generation, try to wean yourself off the habit of using generations for everything. We do it because it's convenient and it's easy and
Mm-hmm.
it's catchy,
Right.
but those are
Right.
not good reasons.
And we learned it, right? We consumed it when we were younger and we take it in. I think one of the reasons why your work struck me so deeply is, as an interculturalist, my training, is around the layers of our identity, right? Around class, ethnicity, racial identity, nationality, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we just skimmed on the age thing. I did, my master's degree was 2004, 2006, but I just feel like we just haven't, yeah, we're not there yet. And
I mean, it's
what's so much.
weird that we
Mm-hmm.
haven't, but I take
Mm-hmm.
heart because of all the people like you and your listeners who have become aware in recent decades of intersectionality, of the
Mm-hmm.
way these different aspects of our identity, inform each other and shape our access to privilege, to voice, to
Mm-hmm.
visibility, all those things. And, when I say to people, I ask, what are the uh, characteristics for inclusion, diversity, and inclusion. And often age is missing. When I
Mm-hmm.
say, what about age? Nobody says that's a dumb idea. Nobody
Right.
says, let me
Right.
get back to you. They smack their foreheads and go,
Mm-hmm.
duh. So I think it's one of the many reasons I'm optimistic about what I do, is that I think hitching age to the intersectional sled is a much smaller ask than it was to say women can
Mm-hmm.
run a Fortune
Mm-hmm.
500 company as well as a
Mm-hmm.
man 60
Right.
years ago. That was a bigger
Right.
ask. Civil rights is still a bigger ask
Mm-hmm.
because of anti-racist work, because in the US of the horrible way it is embedded in our history.
Yep.
But that we all know that it's not right to discriminate against someone on the basis of anything about themselves that they cannot change. And we cannot change our age any more than we can
Yeah.
change, our ethnicity.
Exactly. And that's the one thing that we have in common is our
We all
age.
age.
Mm-hmm. That's so fascinating. And there's something there about, from, if I get to nerd out a little bit with the intercultural perspective, when we are in polarization and we are exaggerating differences, or we're focused on differences, one of the ways to pull out of that is to focus on our shared humanity. And age is anchor for that shared humanity of something that we
I
have in
agree. And I'm
common.
so happy to hear you say that, because in my, rainbow unicorn falling asleep at night dreams, I think of aging and ageism as a way, as a big tent, if you will, to bring people together, to say,
Yep.
we all experience this. Can we have that be a starting point for a conversation and bring in the other pieces of your identity? I mean, ironically, identity politics was coined by progressive Black feminists, the people who came up with the idea of intersectionality, because they didn't want to have to leave their queerness behind, or their Blackness behind, or their femaleness behind. They wanted to be all of themselves. And the one thread through all of this is the one, the one universal human experience is growing older. The one form of prejudice we all experience is age and aging. I mean, for white men, it is often the first form of prejudice that they encounter. And it's like, hello, welcome to our world. But we can take advantage of that awareness to build an experience, to build on the experience of the awfulness of experiencing discrimination and seeing how wrong and unfair it is, as a way to see, to glimpse, for people that have the courage and the will to, as a window into other more marginalized groups' experience.
So that the defenses aren't high, so they can feel like, okay, this is where I can finally feel that embodied, and now I'm ready to be open to others' experiences. I am also hopeful. I'm neither one of us are naive to the levity of this challenge, but it's not.
It's a big ask.
It's right. So one of the things that really shook me about your work is the power of our mindset around aging and how it actually impacts our quality and maybe even length of life. Can you say more?
I don't think there's any maybe about it. Yeah, I mean, for ageism harms our health. Most of the work in this arena has been done by Becca Levy of Yale, who just released a fantastic book called Breaking the Age Code. And she did the groundbreaking study, gosh, must be almost at least 15 years ago, that shows that people with, she calls it more positive age beliefs. I prefer to say, because I'm nerdy, fact rather than fear-based attitudes, because positive aging makes it sound like you sort of cherry pick the happy stuff. And it's really important to acknowledge the scary stuff too.
Yep.
But people with a more, less negative, less ageist understanding of what aging actually involves live an average of 7.5 years longer. They walk faster, they heal quicker. My favorite study of Levy shows that they are less likely to develop Alzheimer's, even if they have the gene that predisposes them to the disease. And I am in the middle right now of writing a blog post about how Levy has done most of the work, but a big poll, the National Poll on Healthy Aging, which was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Open Network, they surveyed 2,035 Americans aged 50 to 80. And they surveyed on what they call everyday ageism, which I don't love that phrase. We don't talk about everyday racism or everyday sexism, but microaggressions, the daily crap that each of us is subjected to in the form of greeting cards and anti-aging messages and all this stuff percolating around us in daily ways. They had to ask, they asked questions about your overall physical health, overall mental health, chronic conditions, and depression. And the people who reported more experience with ageism, 93% of the people said, oh yeah, this happens all the time. Wow. And all of them, the higher the levels of ageist microaggressions they encountered, the worse they fared on each one of those measures of health. Ageism harms our health.
Wow.
Because it's more stress. We have to work much harder to buffer ourselves against the effects of living in an ageist culture. And also because of, here's some nerdy language for you, stereotype embodiment theory. That's like Levy's name for the fact that if you think everything's going to go to hell just because you get older, then when something is harder or your foot hurts or whatever, you think, oh, that's because I'm old. I shouldn't do that because I'm older. Maybe you shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
do it because it's not smart. Maybe you shouldn't
Right.
do it because you're out of shape. Maybe you shouldn't do it because you're too
Right.
smart to do that. But it's not because
Mm-hmm.
of age.
Mm-hmm.
But in
Mm-hmm.
an ageist culture,
Or
we think
yeah.
that's the stereotype. We think, oh, that's not what old people do. That's the stereotype between our heads. So we don't do it. And then
Right.
these become self-fulfilling prophecies.
Right. And we don't do it. So we also do not show other people that it is possible. Right. Every time I
Yep,
see someone running at 75, I'm like, yep, it's possible. Right. So keep your
it's
running
possible.
regimen now. And it doesn't mean it will happen for me or it can happen for everybody, but I
And
know
you're right,
it's
it doesn't
possible.
mean it's possible for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. And I have to be a little bit of a contrarian by pointing out that these people are remarkable. They're great,
Mm-hmm.
these amazing
Right.
athletes, the skydivers, but they are
Yeah.
outliers.
Right.
Really important to remember that if you don't want to pole dance or run a
Mm-hmm.
marathon, you don't have to. And
Right.
even more important, those that message is very ableist. It holds
Mm-hmm.
up a the idea that to age well is
Mm-hmm.
to continue to move and look
Mm-hmm.
like younger versions of ourselves.
Right.
And that's
Right.
not possible.
Yep.
It sets us up to fail. And it is deeply classist too, because that
Mm-hmm.
stuff costs money and
Oh yeah.
takes leisure. So
Mm-hmm.
if you are a couch potato and you can afford to sit on the front porch and read romance novels, more
Mm-hmm.
power to you. You know,
Yep.
there is no wrong way to age. And a lot of people don't have the health or the mobility or the
Mm-hmm.
resources to run marathons. And they really, we should be careful not to judge them and not to hold everyone to this standard of exceptional physical achievement, which is also remarkable.
And that's exactly what I love about your work is how you at the same time you're able to shed light on what is dangerous when we look at these positive ideas of aging, like even the idea of aging well, right, can be dangerous. And this is where I love how your work intersects with class and with ableism and all of those other things. There's a level of
Thank you.
complexity there. um, Could you say more about happiness and aging? Because I think there's some notions. It's a hot topic.
Makes me think of my mother-in-law, who is since died, but she used to say, because I was profoundly skeptical about all of this. I entered this
Mm-hmm.
knowing nothing. I mean, if people watch my TED
Mm,
talk, I start out with a bunch of just facts about aging that I was totally bowled over by, one of which is the U curve of happiness. And
mm-hmm.
Google it. And Ruth used to say, not possible. And I would say, well, I'm so glad you're arguing with the best substantiated data I can call on, which is that people are happiest at the beginnings and the ends of their
Mm-hmm.
lives. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought that must be fine if you're rich. It must be fine if you're married. It must be fine if you live in, Switzerland. It
Mm-hmm.
obtains around the world independent of marital status and of health status. It is a
Wow.
function of the way aging itself affects the healthy brain. And it
Wow.
is also true that older people enjoy better mental health than the young or middle
Hmm.
aged. We have more equanimity.
Well.
We are
Mm-hmm.
generally better at not sweating the small stuff. Stanford did a study of older people. I think it was very good timing. They started it coincidentally right at the beginning of the pandemic or something. Or
Mm-hmm.
anyway, they piggybacked on a study in progress that showed that older people during the pandemic, despite being severely isolated and at far greater risk of death from COVID, came through it better with more equanimity and more resilience than younger people. Not because all older people are like saints or whatever, but it's like having your heart broken. It's awful. But if you've had
Mm-hmm.
your heart broken, you
Mm-hmm.
know that eventually you heal. And simply having a longer view helps
Mm-hmm.
resilience and equanimity and perspective. And those help us get through hard times.
Wow, that's so powerful. When I heard that, I'm 45, so I say I'm halfway to 90. Um, and when I heard that, I'm like, I'm at the bottom of the trough, right? And I'm actually quite happy, right? So it's like this idea of potential of it even getting better that really excited me.
Well, one reason perhaps that you are happy is that you have looked at your fears of aging. I mean, to me, it is amazing that that curve that persists in a
Mm-hmm.
culture that barrages us with messages all day long of how it's all going to
Mm-hmm.
suck and everything's
Mm-hmm.
going to fall apart. Imagine what that will curve will look like once we have raised awareness of ageism. So, but that's the thing, the idea behind the fact-based attitude towards aging. The scary things are real, but there are only two unavoidable negative aspects of getting older. People you've known all your life are going to die, and some part of your body is going to
Mm-hmm.
fall apart. And those are awful things. They are terrible, and no
Mm-hmm.
one wants to lose
Mm-hmm.
physical capacity, which is inevitable. Cognitive decline is not, but
Mm-hmm.
it's totally legit to be
Mm-hmm.
apprehensive about those things. But they
Mm-hmm.
affect each of us in a unique way. Some people adapt. You might, I mean, I'm not an athlete. I hope I
Mm-hmm.
can walk around till the end. I wouldn't suffer if my tennis serve, which is non-existent, deteriorated. It wouldn't be crushing to me. It would be crushing to someone who
Mm-hmm.
plays tennis, if you see what I mean, or someone who's
Mm-hmm.
hugely
Yep.
dependent on maintaining, on trying to look the way they did when they were younger. That's a whole huge task for
Mm-hmm.
women to decouple the idea that
Mm-hmm.
age and beauty cannot coexist. So the tasks are different for each of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, since following your work, I've noticed how many areas in my life I've had ageist thoughts about others, about myself, right? And it seems so
Well, good for
pervasive,
you.
right?
And almost all of this stuff is
Mm-hmm.
unconscious. So you were embarked on the hardest work of all, because it's icky to feel like, oh
Mm-hmm.
crap,
Mm-hmm.
I'm part of the problem. I'm
Mm-hmm.
biased too. But as I said, the next step of
Mm-hmm.
seeing it around you is really liberating and
Mm-hmm.
really powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And this is not the first time I've had to break up bias in my own self, right? Having been born and raised in the Midwest, there were plenty of opportunities for me to have to undo bias. Um, so we can do our own individual work about undoing some of our own ageism. What are some things that we can do on a system level that can make an impact?
Well, that first step is the only essential step. But just by doing that, it's the hardest part. It's the most unpleasant. But when
Mm-hmm.
you do that work,
Mm-hmm.
you change. You stop saying
Mm-hmm.
ageist things. You might say,
Mm-hmm.
if a friend makes an ageist comment, you might gently call them
Mm-hmm.
out on it. And a very useful all purpose rejoinder to an ageist comment is simply, what do you mean by that? Are you retired? What do
Mm-hmm.
you mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
So, just
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm.
just checking that impulse to rate the other people in the room by age, you carry that difference out, even if that is all you do. And the all is in quotes there, because that is the
Mm-hmm.
biggest, hardest task of all.
Right.
Not everyone in the world
Yeah.
can be an activist. The world would be intolerable if it
Mm-hmm.
were full of activists. But even if you think about the way you use the words, old and young. Do you use
Mm-hmm.
old to mean,
Mm-hmm.
insert negative thing, and young to mean sexy and
Mm-hmm.
attractive or with it? You can be those things at
Mm-hmm.
any age, and you can feel,
Mm-hmm.
so decouple the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
attribute, the activity from age, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the work, and carry it out in the world in any
Mm-hmm.
way that makes sense to you. I started I had this bright idea that I had, needless to say, no idea how much work it would be. But I guess, gosh, probably 6 or 7 years ago, I thought, this movement is new. Imagine if the women's movement had had a single repository for the best tools, the best books, the best workshops. So I
Mm-hmm.
created, with two colleagues, the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse. And the URL
Mm-hmm.
is oldschool.info. Everything in it is free except the books. So noodle around
Mm-hmm.
there and see, there are language
Okay.
guides, there are animations, there's workshops, there's consciousness raising guides. that we created. Because
Mm.
consciousness raising is the tool that catalyzed the women's movement, because women came together and had conversations like this one and realized that, oh,
Right.
getting harassed, having my boss pat me on the butt, not having equal power in my
Mm-hmm.
marriage, it's not just me. These are widely shared
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
problems. Zooming out to the social and economic
Mm-hmm.
context, and we can come together and
Mm-hmm.
do something about that. So our consciousness raising guides are free. Download them, start a group, just read the questions, get together with a couple of friends and talk about it. And it's called Who Me Ageist, because that's where it starts, right? And we have
Mm.
Ageist Racist Who Me, which is about the
Mm.
intersection of ageism and racism, and Ageist Sexist Who Me. So,
Wow.
noodle around. There's tons of tools, and there's
Wow.
tons of stuff about language, all sorts of stuff.
I'm so glad you did
Oldschool.info.
that. Okay, that's great because as I said before we started the call, my own process of looking at intergenerational learning started with the Wisdom Fusion project, and then I looked to the research, and I didn't find a lot. There was like a few books out there that had prevalence, but the others felt like they were just reifying stereotypes, right, of what groups are like. So I'm so grateful that you've done the hard
Well, a
work
lot of
to
times,
put
in
that together.
I describe this in the introduction to my book, which you can download for free on Amazon without
Mm-hmm.
paying for the book.
Mm-hmm.
Is that I think a lot of people do what I did, which is at first we're terrified of aging,
Mm-hmm.
icky, scary, awful, don't want to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
We educate
Mm-hmm.
ourselves and go, oh, it's actually not so terrible as I thought. And I can do all these things, you sort of the pendulum swings to the positive
Mm-hmm.
aging side of things. If I do
Mm-hmm.
these things, those, these activities, those scary things won't happen to me. And it needs to swing back to the middle,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? And I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of and also if you were at the end where where the pendulum swings to sort of this successful aging, positive aging thing, people make money off gym memberships and
Mm-hmm.
supplements
Mm-hmm.
and hormone treatments
Mm-hmm.
and plastic
Mm-hmm.
surgery, and no one makes money off satisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
So there are enormous economic forces wanting you to be terrified of aging,
Mm-hmm.
wanting younger people to think that my 69-year-old face and body are disgusting. That's
Mm-hmm.
where the money
Mm-hmm.
is. Fear is
Yep.
profitable. Fear pits us
Mm-hmm.
against each other. And only when we see those things, which takes a lot of work, can you move to the middle to see both sides of the story. But that's what feels real. I mean, when I
Mm-hmm.
was at the happy end, I
Mm-hmm.
knew sort of queasily that I wasn't addressing the whole picture. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
life is like that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's for me with midlife that I've learned. Like I felt this is kind of where my project started was, reaching 40, mid 40. I kind of felt like when I was 20, oh, the 40-year-olds were lying to us. Like, why didn't anybody say anything, And I think it's that pendulum, right? Where I was only looking at one side and I wasn't yet in the middle. It's either this or that. I had to come to the middle and go, there are things that are amazing and there are things that are hard, and both are true at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why it's so
So,
important for people of all ages to come together and talk about this
mm-hmm.
stuff. I mean, I just think, and I will say, I do see it somewhat through a gendered lens, because aging is harder for women because of the intersection of sexism and
Mm-hmm.
ageism. We're punished for appearing to
Mm-hmm.
visibly age. And if more older women had younger friends, we would be more generous and
Mm-hmm.
more kind, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and we would remember how
Mm-hmm.
hard it is to be young, right? It gets
Mm-hmm.
easier, believe it or not, even
Mm-hmm.
in an ageist and sexist culture. And if more younger women were friends with older women
Mm-hmm.
who really like being the age we are, and see how
Yeah.
liberating and confidence
Mm-hmm.
inspiring and freeing it is, they
Mm-hmm.
they would be less afraid, right? So,
Yeah.
and it's much harder to hold
Completely.
on to stereotypes, obviously, when you mix it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that just makes my heart like burst with joy when I think of that potential for community. And that model, that intergenerational community, is not a new one. It's a very old one that we've lost, obviously. And I
Well,
think
yeah, I
it's
mean, in
time.
the olden days, we all lived in villages, with
Mm-hmm.
all people mixed, not necessarily. the world is now more ethnically mixed because of globalization. We're in contact with more people who are not of our race or ethnicity, but it's way more age segregated.
Absolutely. And in the research that I've read recently about aging, that has also had a negative impact on cultures and countries that traditionally have given honor to older members of their society. That it's actually that modernization has created more separation and harder outcomes for those who are older.
And capitalism, global capitalism, because in a capitalist culture, our value is linked to our conventional economic productivity, and that is not a great measure of the worth and value and contribution of a person, and it's especially punitive to children who don't vote and don't make money, to older people,
right,
to people with disabilities, to all the people who have higher barriers to participation in the global economy on favorable terms, on equitable terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked so much about the topic. And I think for those who are listening, they absolutely have to check out the book where you can get even deeper with this. But it makes me just curious about you. Do you mind if we shift our attention?
It's fun to read.
It is fun to read. I seriously, I read your book. I have an audiobook of yours. And so I was running in my area and laughing out loud. Imagine what that looked like. When I'm like running and laughing, they might have thought, let's what is she running from?
I figure people hear Manifesto Against Ageism, which is of course what I want them to hear, but then they go, oh my God, that's going to be a lot of fiber. There's a lot of fiber, but it's not a heavy going, I promise.
No, it's so good. And for any level, not just age, but all the intersections that we've been talking about, it's enlightening. But I'm curious about you. Like, why are you doing this? How did you get started with all of this?
There's just no meet cute story, I'm afraid. I was in my mid-50s. And I realized that I was really like this getting old thing. It was going to happen. It was happening to me, right? I wasn't like going to get like the only pass in the history of humanity. That's where ageism takes root. I mean, it's just nutty that we go through life pretending that this thing that's happening to us every day isn't going to happen to me. And so being nerdy, I started digging into the subject like you, as you did, and just doing it. I was self-employed, so I didn't get kicked out of a job or anything. But I just started looking into longevity and learning within a matter of months the facts that I started that TED Talk out with, 10 years later, that were just floating. I mean, I did not cherry pick my data. I did not, pick the few studies that weren't scary. These facts are so readily available. And then I became obsessed with why so few people know these things, and the short answer is because if aging is made into a pathologized, these natural transitions, then we can be persuaded to buy things to quote unquote cure aging, which is not a disease. Aging is living. And if it is problematized, then we can be persuaded to buy things to like stop it or fix it, right? And it's not a problem or a disease. It's this amazing journey that each of us embarks on the day we're born, with lots of challenges, but also I think of myself as in the both sides of the story business. The challenges are real, but we never talk about the other side of the story, which are the countless ways in which it enriches us. And this age bias makes it so much harder to do that. And that is really soul sucking. And it also divides us in ways that have disastrous, larger political consequences.
Absolutely. I love how you talked about, what we learn and what we gain. You couldn't pay me to go back to high school or college. Like, I don't want to go there because of all of the that's why they call it hard-earned wisdom, right? Like, I don't even want to be who I was then because I've paid for this wisdom with my experience.
It's hard earned. We know that. A book, a quote by the writer Anne Lamott, and it's an idea that I've heard from various people, which is that we contain all the ages we have ever been. which when you
Mm-hmm.
hear it is
Mm-hmm.
so intuitively obvious, and yet we have this prevailing notion of age as loss. And we do
Yes.
lose things, but we also gain a
Mm-hmm.
tremendous amount. So let's tell the full story.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love that quote, especially because it helps me when I engage with someone who feels different from me age wise. It helps me connect there. Like what do we have in common? And where are we the same? I love that concept. I think that's
Nice.
beautiful.
Very nice.
Let's talk about you. And, I talk about ambitious transformation and transition. I'm curious about you right now. What are some transitions that you're feeling, whether it's a global transition that we have many to choose from, or maybe even a family transition or a personal transition? What are your most burning transitions right now?
Well, I mean, on the most surface level, we're coming out of, a friend called it the main pandemic, which I find a useful phrase. So
Mm-hmm.
I am starting to, go out in the world and, do fun stuff with other people in the room, which is nice and
Mm-hmm.
delicious privilege. I'm also starting to speak in public again, so it's like, oh, remember
That's
what
good.
this is like, and
Mm-hmm.
having to rethink what I say and how I say it in view of this new world. I did a tremendous amount of thinking around ableism, which is discrimination and prejudice on the basis of physical or cognitive ability during the pandemic, because a lot of what we think of as ageism is actually apprehension about physical or mental changes. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not actually ageism, right? Plenty of young
Mm-hmm.
people are
Right.
disabled, plenty of older people are not.
Yes.
So disentangling
Yep.
this stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so I would say the hardest work I'm doing is, and this, I also credit the pandemic for extra time to reflect. Not that I want to say the pandemic was anything but hideous horror.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it did make me think about stuff. I emerged literally. I was in New York at the time where, if you looked at a map in April 2020, where the giant red bullseye everywhere was New York City, and all you could hear was
Mm-hmm.
ambulances. But I emerged from that into the Black Lives Matter
Mm-hmm.
demonstrations in the streets, literally. I mean, with a mask on my bike, which sort of kept people away from me, and
Mm-hmm.
that was just amazingly powerful. So I have been trying hard to up my anti-racist game and to
Mm-hmm.
understand more clearly about how to be a better ally, which mainly means
Mm-hmm.
shutting up, and how to listen to people from, it sounds cliched, but to listen to, Black people, brown people, disabled people,
Mm-hmm.
about what matters to them, and how
Yep.
down the line how I can support what they're doing, in the hopes
Mm-hmm.
that they will eventually help me understand how I can make my work more relevant to them. I think there's this idea that if you are busy being anti-racist, who has time for ageism? And I
Mm-hmm.
don't mean to say
Mm-hmm.
for a minute, I am a privileged white cis straight white
Mm-hmm.
woman who enjoys
Yep.
enormous privilege, and it's up to anyone to be concerned with whatever they're concerned about. And obviously, being in particular Black in the US carries its own set of enormous risks and challenges, which I can sure understand being your highest priority. But I think the overarching point is we don't have to choose. When we are being anti-ageist, when we are being anti-racist, right? So if
Right.
we can acknowledge that these two communities share experience that would be valuable
Mm-hmm.
to each other, right? And join
Mm-hmm.
forces
Mm-hmm.
in the ways that make sense. Think of the potential for
Totally.
alliances,
Totally.
and to make a movement that really does represent us all. So that's what I'm working on, is trying to make more friendships and alliances with people who don't look like me, and in the
Mm-hmm.
process to work towards shaping a movement that is right now predominantly represented by privileged white women like me. What a
Mm-hmm.
coincidence!
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
figure out how to help it represent more marginalized groups, so that it is truly a movement that represents us all. It's
That's
hard.
wonderful. Yeah, no kidding. It's hard, but what are your options?
The more I
Yeah.
learn, the more I understand, the more I revise things I used to say that I don't say anymore. So
Mm-hmm.
for curious people like you and me, I mean, if
Mm-hmm.
you had told me 15 years ago I'd be fascinated by aging, I would have said, ew, why do I want to think about something
Mm-hmm.
sad and icky? And it's anything but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's so wonderful. No, I look forward to hearing what the next phase is for you. And it does give me hope on all fronts, right? On all of the levels of how it will impact our society. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I know I'll put all your references in the show notes about your book. They've got to run out and get it. Is there anything special that you want to highlight that people should go out and check out if they want to know more about your work?
Thank you for the question. Honestly, aging is universal, but it is also utterly unique. And the thing that matters the most to me, the wonky, nerdy stuff is probably not the
Mhm.
stuff that will engage, most people. So that's the
Mhm.
purpose behind the old school clearinghouse, is to just
Mhm.
noodle around. If you're a podcast listener, listen to the podcast.
Mhm.
There's all sorts of, short, zippy animations. Or it's
Mhm.
searchable by topic. Maybe you're interested in language. Maybe you're interested in
Mhm.
education. So I would say go do some browsing. I guess I was saying window
Mhm.
shopping, but that's not the right metaphor. Noodle
Mhm.
around and see what
Mhm.
fits your interests and your style of learning.
Yeah. I love the bite-sized learning that you do on Instagram. You just have one little reframe or one little reframe about language, and it's like, oh, got it. I'm going to change that. And you move on. I've
Oh,
been
good.
enjoying that
I
from.
mean, I am very active on social media. I don't post pictures of my puppies, or I don't have puppies, I admit, or my lunch. I do have lunch, but my point is, I do really try to stick to ageism for the most part. I'm active on Twitter, and I have a YouTube channel where I make these short videos. Like the longest is a minute 45, where I
Mhm.
take some question that comes into my Yo, Is This Ageist blog,
Mhm.
which is also something to look at, where people send in, questions. So there's
Mhm.
lots of bite-sized ways to get your feet wet, and something that is incredibly relevant or meaningful to you won't interest the guy next door, but he'll find something.
Mhm. It's great. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show. It means the world to me. I'm a huge fan of your work, and I see the power and the potential of shifting people one step at a time. So appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you for doing such an important part of the work yourself.
Thank you so much. So thank you everyone else who's been listening. This is In Transit with Sundae Bean. I will leave you with one of my favorite quotes from our guest today, Ashton Applewhite. Aging isn't a problem or a disease. Aging is living.